Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 188th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. And welcome to April and this month's theme, which is Please Don't Workplace Mistakes. Before we carry on with today's show, I wanted to ask, have you watched my TEDx talk about the connection between culture, race, and mental health? It's now live and something you can watch in a break as it's just 12 minutes long. The link is in the show notes, but I'll also give it to you here. It's bit.ly/TEDx Wolves, WOLVES, capital LO. I really hope you enjoy it because it was a labor of love and a lot of planning went into it. And if you did enjoy it, please leave a positive comment on YouTube, share, and like with others. Okay, so back to this episode and this month's theme of Please Don't Workplace Mistakes. So why this topic and why now? Well, I don't know about you, but what I've noticed is that workplaces seem in real disarray at the moment. And in fact, there's a CNBC article, which I've included in the show notes from September 2022 by Jennifer Liu. And she talks about this, and it talks specifically about dysfunction and transitioning post-COVID era workforce and how it's reached a fever pitch. And you may have talked with colleagues, friends, family members in the last month, and maybe you've talked about some of the themes that we have seen repeatedly hitting the news. So quiet quitting, i.e. setting boundaries, not taking on extra work, not answering emails after hours, essentially doing your job like it used to be 15 years ago, and not so quiet quitting, backlash from bosses, from managers as well, and warnings of just, quiet firing when people manage themselves out. We've also seen across the world striking, unionization, and in the UK, more women than ever have started their own business. So in 2022, women in the UK launched 151,603 companies. That was up from 145,271 companies in 2021, and also more than twice the level in 2018. And that's according to an independent review led by Alison Rose, the chief executive of the NatWest Group, and published in the Financial Times. So very interesting. And of course, if we think about women still being primary carers, managing things, for younger dependents and older dependents, running your own business gives you an opportunity to manage your time in a way that you want to. Teachers and nurses, again, globally are burnt out beyond belief and say they're reaching breaking point. We've seen this with police as well, in terms of people leaving the police force and the disarray in the police force. And this term, the Great Resignation, has become less of what we might think of as the odd person leaving, as really very high turnover every month in organizations has become the new normal. And in fact, I see that people seem to have jobs for far less time, which isn't bad in and of itself, but does show the fact that people are looking for better working conditions, better opportunities. And if they can't get it, they're not afraid of going for it. And even the fact that we've got this cost of living crisis and a recession and tough times, I think people are really being brave and saying, I'm not going to take it anymore. And it's thought from a Gallup poll that around 20% of employees globally are thriving at work, that actually 19% are downright miserable. And of course, we know if we're not happy at work, we're more likely to experience long-term stress and mental ill health. Now, maybe this sounds familiar to you and you've noticed a change in your workplace, or you're a manager who wants to know how to do things more effectively or challenge upwards. One argument, interestingly, is that work has always been dysfunctional. And I think we can agree with that. I'm not saying work is a perfect place, but it does seem to me things are taking a very long time. People are really having to battle a lot for what they need and want. But work has always been dysfunctional, but at this present time, we're less likely to put up with that. Now, while I agree with that to an extent, and there is testament in terms of the number of women starting their own businesses, some of us may be able to do that, but I don't think this is the case for everyone. And I really hope you're enjoying the content of this newsletter and want to keep up to date. Then why not join my bi-monthly newsletter? When you join, you'll receive a free copy of my ebook, The Mentally Healthy Leading Manager. And the link is in the show notes, but I'll also give it to you here. It's bit.ly/DMMCHSU. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about what I think are the top 5 inclusion workplace mistakes and what can be done about it. So at number one, and they're not actually ranked, but at number one is what I call a throwing data javelins. So this is about collection of data. It might not be done very well and it might not be interpreted in a sophisticated way. And by all means, lay out the facts, but please don't deny the way people feel and wrongdoing with what I call these data javelins. So throwing the data and saying, well, data being used as a way of gripping onto power frequently and used to evidence that there is nothing to see here. There's nowhere to hide now in terms of gender pay gap, but ethnicity pay gap and disability pay gap and general staff contentment, one staff survey done every 3 years isn't going to cut it. And this doesn't build trust, and it makes staff and the public sense that there are more untruths to come. And also using data as a smokescreen and saying we need more information constantly. So we see this in the government right now. I've seen it in higher education. We need more information. We need more information. We need more information, more research, more public inquiries. It just has to stop. We actually know that things haven't shifted enough. So the doing is really, really important. The second thing, and this is something that really, really irritates me, actually makes me quite furious. When I say it, you may think, "Oh, she's exaggerating this," but it's saying that you want the workplace to be like a family. Please, no. You want the workplace to be a professional, supportive community. Yes. Maybe that is your family, but for many people, that's not the case. So let's think about the fact in families, there's a real lack of accountability and roles that are thrust on people. People have to step in. I hear lots of stories when people say, my sibling doesn't do any support with my parents' elder care. I have to do it all. No one sits down and says, let's have a positive communication policy in our family or a grievance policy. And, you shouldn't really need that, but we don't have those boundaries and protection mechanisms. So saying that you want the workplace to be like a family, and if people have had bad family experiences, many people don't have a family in a traditional way. People grow up in care. This is incredibly isolating. So please, can we stop saying that? And I think actually by saying that, what we're doing is we're causing more dysfunction, because families, as we know, in the whole and a majority of families are very dysfunctional. So if you say you want the workplace to be like a family, I think that's really setting it all up for failure. What you want to be saying, in my eyes, is we want this to be a professional, supportive community, which has a very different feel to it. And you can set the parameters, set the tone, have charters, have discussions, and give feedback. We know in families that's very difficult. And I think having any of the discussions, the things we talk about, mental health in this podcast, mental well-being, race equity, feelings of discomfort, the pushback is 10 times more in a family. We don't have the psychological contract and that safety around us. So really wanted to mention that. The third thing is relying on unconscious bias or low-level training and not leaning into discomfort to consider systemic change. So it's all nice. Some people don't find it nice. That's the other thing. And many people have had a terrible experience of equality, diversity, and inclusion training. Yes, the legal parameters of it are so important, but for me, relying solely on unconscious bias training and saying, we're just going to have a 90-minute session and everything will be fine is not a way to create inclusion. We have to look at biases and how they show up, conscious, subconscious, and unconscious, or, ways of working that are so dominant that we are not cognizant of what's actually going on. So you have to think about the strategies, the policies, the procedures, and the training that overlays that. And also remember, this is a journey, not a destination. So how do you lean into the discomfort to create the systemic change? We have to look at, as I always talk about, the individual input, the institutional input, and the systemic input, and how they feed up and how they feed down. So an example could be you want to think about equitable practices in terms of global majority women in your workplace. So we need to look at the systems that enhance white dominant norms, what's going on in the business, what can be changed. It's great to do listening groups, but are you really listening? Then think about the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious biases, how they come out in language, in practice, in policies, in assumptions, and a Eurocentric cultural lens. So, one 90-minute training session is not going to do anything. So relying on that is pretty useless, and for me is a really big inclusion workplace mistake. Okay, number 4, and lots of conversations about this in the last few weeks, making staff networks or employee resource groups do the work that specialised teams should be doing. I want to be really clear and say, absolutely, staff networks need to be feeding in. They need to be given time allocation, resource allocation, and support to do that. But they are not there, for example, as a group of people who have day jobs and are probably very, very stretched to organize conferences, to organize big conferences, to do press releases, to make their work be visible, to fill out your race equality charter marks or things that you're going for. They're a part of the process. They're not the whole process. And what happens is, and I hear this so much, particularly in higher education, is why are we being told that we have to everything feeds up from the bottom. So we're working. We've got our day jobs. We're desperately trying to get certain training on the agenda, and we have to fight for it. And then we get invited to networks. We have to be representatives on diverse interview, as part of interview panels that are diverse, and we're not seen. And it's doing this sort of donkey work and being on the hamster wheel. It's not valued. So if there's a specialized team, say corporate comms, HR, EDI, corporate governance, C-suite, they should really be pushing this agenda and getting a sense check from the staff networks, not making the staff networks do all the work themselves. And you see it with disability. Okay, so let's look at how to make systems accessible. Let's talk about, we want to showcase this. Let's talk about the process, then get some critical feedback in from the staff networks and listen to them and take that on board. And I think for me, that's a huge mistake. And I see it all the time. Okay, and then number 5, I'm getting to the end, don't worry, is not saying sorry. So why can't organizations start with saying sorry to move forward? Now, a few do this. I'm not going to say that no one does this. And it can be a complex thing with a number of factors at play. So ranging from fear of losing face, not wanting to admit being wrong. That's a very central tenet, avoidance of white dominant culture, and not being able to face saying sorry. And again, going back to my point about families, there are many families where people will not say sorry. So this is another reason to not align your workplace with a family. But anyway, back to this specific point. As we know, not issuing an apology is much worse. Pretending something hasn't happened when it has and everyone knows about it is wrong. We've seen the reports that have just come out, the Louise Casey report that has just come out about the Met. Sadly, tragically, I think many of us were not shocked. Pretending, shoving things away, the horrors that have come out, and it's not just about saying sorry and stopping there. You have to change it. But I think hiding it away is a surefire way to lose respect, trust, and goodwill. It builds a wall of defensiveness and distrust between the majority of staff, the organization, and the senior leadership team. You need to make a genuine apology, state what you're going to do about the issue, and act in a timely fashion. This builds trust and it demonstrates organizations are human, vulnerable, and open to admitting that things aren't perfect. And you need to show staff that you value them by listening and aiming to do things right. This shows that you choose to improve organizational culture over protecting yourself or the organization. So I don't know if any organization's got this 100% right. I see different variations of these 5 key things. And of course, we know there are many more, but I don't want to be here all year talking about things. As always, I'd really love to know your thoughts. So if you want to leave me an anonymous voice note, please don't forget I've got my SpeakPipe. The link is in the show notes. And traditional work is in an interesting place right now. Things have to change and adapt. And if we think about inclusion and workplace mistake, we need to use data intelligently and wisely and share that and not keep asking for more data when we've got the answers. We need to look at workplaces as a professional, supportive community with boundaries, adhering to contracts, policies, and procedures fairly across the board. We need to think about discomfort and leaning into that and hypothetically understanding what might be going on for people, having conversations, and really embedding psychological safety. Ensuring that inclusion work is done from the top and that staff networks and employees that want to get involved are used as critical friends and sounding boards, given resource and time allocation and not just be told to do everything. And finally, we all make mistakes. We're human. So say sorry. This is absolutely vital. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you have, please leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast from. And the resources I've linked to are the CNBC article, Why Does Work Feel So Dysfunctional Right Now? Experts Weigh In, and my article about do this one thing to create trust in your organization. So thank you so much. And please join me next week where I'm going to be speaking to the phenomenal Donna Patterson, who took her employer Morrison's to court, self-represented, and won the case. So stay tuned and take care, everyone. And we look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Until then, bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.